The wagon wheels groaned against the dusty trail, each rotation carrying Clara May Carter further from everything she'd ever known. She sat rigid on the hard wooden bench, her calloused hands folded in her lap, trying not to think about what awaited her at the McAllister ranch. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the barren landscape of Dusty Creek, painting the world in shades of gold and rust. "Almost there, miss," the driver called back, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "McAllister spreads just over that ridge." Clara's stomach tightened. She was 23 years old, past the age when most women in these parts were married with children clinging to their skirts. But poverty had a way of delaying such things, and now she was to be Thomas McAllister's bride, a transaction as cold and calculated as any cattle trade. Her father had made the arrangement 6 months ago, trading her hand for a parcel of land that bordered their failing farm. "It's for the family. Clara May," he'd said, unable to meet her eyes. "The McAllisters are respectable folk. Thomas'll provide for you proper." Respectable. The word tasted bitter as desert sand. The wagon crested the hill, and Clara got her first glimpse of her new home. The McAllister ranch sprawled across the valley like a small kingdom, weathered buildings, sturdy fences, and more cattle than she'd ever seen in one place. It spoke of prosperity, of the kind of security her family had never known. But where was Thomas? Instead of her intended, a lone figure on horseback waited by the ranch gate. As they drew closer, Clara could make out broad shoulders and a weather-beaten hat pulled low. The man dismounted with easy grace, and she caught her breath. This wasn't Thomas. "Miss Carter." The voice was deep, rougher around the edges than she'd expected. He pushed back his hat, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds and a face carved by wind and sun. "I'm James McAllister. My brother sends his regrets business in town couldn't wait." Business? On the day his bride arrived, James helped her down from the wagon, his hands gentle but work-hardened. For a moment, their eyes met, and something passed between them quick as lightning, gone before she could name it. "I'll see to your things," he said, already turning away. "Martha will show you to your room." Clara watched him hefting her meager trunk like it weighed nothing. So, this was the younger brother she'd heard whispers about, the quiet one, the one who worked the land while Thomas worked the ledgers. Martha, the housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. She was a stout woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "Come along, dear. You look ready to drop." The house was finer than anything Clara had known, with real glass windows and floors that didn't creak with every step. But it felt cold somehow, like a place where people lived without really living. "Master Thomas should be back by supper," Martha said, leading her up the stairs. "He's particular about his meals, so mind you're down by 6 sharp." Clara's room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. She sat on the edge of the mattress, suddenly exhausted. Through the window, she could see James in the corral, working with a young horse. He moved with quiet confidence, speaking low words she couldn't hear. The animal, which had been skittish and wild, gradually calmed under his patient hands. "That's the difference between them brothers," Martha said from the doorway, following Clara's gaze. "Master Thomas breaks horses. Master James gentles them." The older woman left, and Clara unpacked her few belongings: 3 dresses, her mother's Bible, a tortoise-shell comb, everything she owned in the world, and none of it truly hers anymore. When 6 o'clock came, she descended to find Thomas had indeed returned. He stood by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, looking every inch the prosperous rancher, tall and lean, with carefully pomaded hair and clothes that spoke of town dealings rather than ranch work. "Clara." He said her name like he was checking an item off a list. "Good. You made it safely." No apology for his absence. No warmth in his greeting. They sat for supper, Thomas at the head of the table, Clara to his right, James across from her. The brothers couldn't have been more different. where Thomas dominated the conversation with talk of cattle prices and land acquisitions. James ate quietly, speaking only when spoken to. The Jeffersons are selling their water rights, Thomas announced, cutting into his beef with precise movements. Fools don't know what they're sitting on. I'll have their signatures by week's end. They've got 6 children to feed, James said quietly. Drought's been hard on them. Thomas waved dismissively. That's the problem with these people, no vision. In business, you can't afford sentiment. Clara felt James's eyes on her, but didn't dare look up. She could feel the tension between the brothers, thick as summer heat. And what about you, Clara? Thomas asked suddenly. Can you read right? Yes, sir. My mother taught me before she passed. Good. You'll help with the ledgers. A rancher's wife should be useful. Useful? Like a good broodmare or a well-trained dog. After supper, Thomas excused himself to his study. Clara found herself alone on the porch, grateful for the cool evening air. The stars were just beginning to show, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. It's not an easy life out here. She startled. James had approached so quietly she hadn't heard him. He leaned against the porch rail, keeping a respectful distance. I'm not afraid of hard work, Clara said. I can see that. He glanced at her hands, noting the calluses that matched his own. Thomas, he's not unkind, just focused on building something bigger. Clara wondered if he was trying to convince her or himself. And you? She asked, surprising herself with the question. What are you focused on? James was quiet for a long moment. Keeping things alive, he said finally. The land, the animals, making sure there's something left when all the building's done. A coyote howled in the distance, and Clara shivered despite the warm evening. James shrugged out of his jacket and handed it to her. It smelled of leather and sage and honest work. Thank you, she whispered. Best get inside, he said, already stepping back. Thomas doesn't like... He didn't finish, but Clara understood. Thomas didn't like his things touched, even in kindness. That night, lying in the narrow bed, Clara stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine her future. In 2 weeks, she'd stand before the traveling preacher and promise to love, honor, and obey Thomas McAllister. She'd bear his children, keep his house, help build his empire. But when she closed her eyes, it wasn't Thomas she saw. It was storm-gray eyes and gentle hands, a quiet voice talking to horses in the fading light. She pressed her face into the pillow, ashamed of her own heart. She'd been bought and paid for, as surely as any head of cattle. What she wanted had never been part of the bargain. In the morning, she woke to the sound of horses and men's voices. Through her window, she could see Thomas mounted on a magnificent black stallion, dressed for town again. James stood by, holding the horse's bridle. I'll be back Thursday, Thomas was saying. There's a card game in Millerton. Judge's son'll be there, and he owes me money. What about Clara? She's only just arrived. What about her? She's got a roof over her head and food on the table. Martha'll keep her busy. Thomas spurred his horse and was gone in a cloud of dust, leaving James standing there. He looked up then, catching sight of Clara in the window. For a moment, neither moved. Then he touched the brim of his hat and turned away. Clara dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen. Martha was already at work, kneading bread with practiced motions. Don't look so downcast, child, the older woman said. Master Thomas has his ways, but you'll learn them. We all do. How long have you been here? Near on 15 years. Came when the boy's mother was still alive. Good woman. God rest her. She'd have liked you. Clara helped with the morning chores, grateful for work to occupy her hands and mind. But when Martha sent her to gather eggs, she found James in the barn, doctoring a mare's split hoof. Let me, Clara said, kneeling beside him. My father kept horses. They worked in companionable silence. Clara holding the horse steady while James cleaned and wrapped the wound. His movements were sure but gentle, and the mare barely flinched. "You're good with them," Clara observed. "They're honest creatures. Treat them fair. They'll give you everything." He paused, then added quietly, "Not like people." Clara felt the weight of words unspoken. Here was a man who'd spent his life in his brother's shadow, building something he'd never fully own. "Why didn't you leave?" she asked. "Make your own way." James stood, wiping his hands on his pants. "This land, it's in my blood. Every fence post, every well I helped build it. Can't walk away from that, even if it would never truly be his." Clara understood. She'd felt the same about her family's failing farm, that bone-deep connection to place that went beyond ownership. "Best get those eggs to Martha," James said, but he was smiling slightly. "She gets cranky when breakfast is late." As Clara walked back to the house, basket in hand, she felt the first stirring of something dangerous. Not love, it was too soon for that, but recognition. In James McAllister, she saw a kindred spirit, someone else caught between duty and desire. She thought of her father's words. The McAllisters are respectable folk. If only he'd known that respectability could be its own kind of prison. The morning sun crept over the horizon like spilled honey, painting the McAllister ranch in shades of amber and gold. Clara had been at the ranch for a week now, and she'd fallen into a rhythm of sorts up before dawn to help Martha with breakfast. Then the endless cycle of cleaning, mending, and preparing meals. Thomas had returned from his business trip only to leave again, this time for a cattle auction 2 counties over. "That man spends more time away than a traveling preacher," Martha muttered, kneading dough with particular violence. "Mark my words, child. You'll be raising your babies with more help from James than your own husband." Clara's cheeks flushed at the mention of babies, but Martha's words about James struck deeper. He'd been nothing but proper since her arrival. Yet his quiet presence filled the spaces Thomas left empty. "Speaking of Master James," Martha continued, "he mentioned you knew your way around horses. We've got a mare that needs exercising, been cooped up since she threw a shoe. Why don't you take her out? Do you both good to get some air?" Clara found James in the stable, running his hands along the mare's legs. The horse was a pretty thing, dappled gray with intelligent eyes. "Martha says she needs exercise," Clara said from the doorway. James straightened, a smile tugging at his lips. "Martha says a lot of things, but she's right about this one. You ever ride astride?" "My mother would roll in her grave," Clara admitted, "but side saddle seems foolish out here." "Everything's foolish out here by proper standards." He led the mare into the sunlight. "Come on, I'll teach you. Thomas won't be back for days, and what he doesn't know won't hurt him." Clara's heart skipped. There was something rebellious in his tone, a hint of the man beneath the dutiful brother. "First things first," James said. "You can't ride properly in that." He gestured to her heavy skirts. "Martha keeps some of her late husband's things in the tack room. He was a small man, they might fit." Minutes later, Clara emerged wearing canvas trousers and a loose shirt, her hair tied back simply. She felt exposed and free all at once. James cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at her. "Right then, let's start with mounting." He showed her how to grip the saddle horn, where to place her foot, how to swing up in one smooth motion. His hands were steady on her waist, helping her balance, and Clara tried not to notice how warm they were through the thin shirt. "Good," he said, stepping back. "Now, hold the reins like this, firm but gentle. Horses can feel your fear through the leather." They started slow, James walking alongside as Clara got used to the mare's gait. The horse was patient. Seeming to understand, she carried a novice. "What's her name?" Clara asked. "Buttercup. Thomas thinks it's a fool name for a ranch horse, but Mama named her." His voice softened at the mention of his mother. She had a way of seeing beauty where others saw utility. Tell me about her." James was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She came from back east, like you. Loved books and music, things that seemed out of place here. But she made it work. Taught us boys to read by lamplight. Made sure we knew there was a world beyond cattle and dust." "She sounds wonderful." Died when I was 15. Thomas was 20. Already running things with Pa. After she went, Pa just gave up, died 2 years later. Thomas has been in charge ever since." Clara heard the unspoken words James had been grieving too. But someone had to keep the ranch running while Thomas built his empire. "Ready to try a trot?" James asked, changing the subject. The next hour passed in a blur of instruction and laughter. Clara took to riding like she'd been born to it. And soon they were cantering across the open range, the wind whipping her hair free of its ties. She felt wild and alive in a way she'd never experienced. They stopped by a stream to water the horses. Clara dismounted, legs shaky but spirit soaring. "I haven't felt this free since I was a child," she said, splashing water on her flushed face. "Freedom's a rare thing out here," James said, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Especially for women. And younger brothers." He smiled ruefully. "Especially them." They sat on the bank, boots off, feet in the cool water. The propriety of it should have bothered Clara, but it didn't. Nothing about James felt improper, even when it was. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "Why did Thomas agree to marry me? He doesn't seem to need a wife." James picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his hands. "Thomas needs an heir, someone to pass all this to. And he needs a woman who won't expect more. More love, companionship. The things that make a marriage more than a business arrangement." He skipped the stone across the water. "He figured a woman in your situation wouldn't have romantic notions." Clara laughed bitterly. "He figured right. Romance is a luxury people like me can't afford." "That's not true." James's voice was fierce suddenly. "Everyone deserves to be loved. Clara, everyone deserves kindness and tenderness and—" He cut himself off, color rising in his cheeks. "Forgive me, I spoke out of turn." "No," Clara said softly. "No, you didn't." They rode back slowly, the easy companionship replaced by awareness. Every accidental touch as James helped her dismount felt charged with meaning. Over the next days, their riding lessons became a routine. Thomas's absence stretched on, apparently. The cattle auction had turned into an opportunity to negotiate water rights with a neighboring rancher. His letters to the house were brief and businesslike, asking about accounts and inventory, never about Clara. James taught her more than riding. He showed her how to read the weather in cloud formations, how to tell if a cow was sick by the way it held its head, how to mend a fence and shoot a rifle. "Why are you teaching me all this?" Clara asked one afternoon as they repaired a gate damaged by a stubborn bull. "Someone should know these things besides me." James said, "In case," he stopped. "In case what?" "Nothing. Hold this board steady while I nail it." But Clara understood. In case Thomas's ambitions finally took him too far from the land. In case something happened to James. In case the ranch needed someone who cared about more than ledgers and profits. One evening, a storm rolled in fast and fierce. Clara was in the barn, having stayed late to finish braiding new rope. When the sky opened up, rain hammered the roof like gunfire, and lightning split the darkness. James appeared in the doorway, soaked through. "Clara, what are you doing here? I've been looking everywhere." "I lost track of time," she shouted over the storm. He crossed to her, rain streaming from his hat. "We need to get the horses in. This storm's going to get worse before it gets better." They worked together, bringing the panicked animals into the safety of the barn. One mare, heavy with foal, was trapped in the far pasture, too frightened to move. Without hesitation, James plunged back into the storm. Clara followed. "You can't handle her alone." "Clara, no." But she was already beside him, rain plastering her clothes to her skin. Together they coaxed the mare back, Clara speaking the soothing words James had taught her while he guided the animal through the wind. They finally got all the horses safe, collapsing against the barn wall, exhausted and drenched. Lightning illuminated James's face, and Clara saw something raw in his expression. "You could have been hurt," he said roughly. "Or worse." "So could you. That's different." "Why?" Clara challenged. "Because you're a man. Because this is your responsibility. Because if something happened to you, I'd—" He stopped, jaw clenched. "You'd what?" James turned away. "Thomas would never forgive me." The word stung more than the cold rain. Of course, she was Thomas's property, and James was just protecting his brother's investment. They didn't speak as they waited out the storm. When it finally passed, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming, James walked her to the house. "Clara," he said at the door. "What I meant was—" "I know what you meant," she said quietly. "Good night, James." But that night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the way he'd looked at her in the lightning's flash, the desperation in his voice when he thought she might be hurt. That wasn't the concern of a man protecting his brother's property. The next morning brought a letter from Thomas. He'd be delayed another week. Business in Denver couldn't wait. He instructed Clara to review the household accounts and make sure James wasn't being too generous with the hired hand's wages. "His own brother," Martha tutted, reading over Clara's shoulder. "As if James hasn't been breaking his back for this place since he was old enough to hold a hammer." Clara found James at the forge, repairing horseshoes. His shirt was off in the heat, and she could see the scars across his back from work, from weather, from a lifetime of carrying more than his share. "Thomas wrote," she said. "Another week." James didn't look up from his work. "Of course. He wants me to review your wages for the hands." That made him look up, eyes flashing. "Does he now?" "I won't, of course. I've seen how hard they work, how hard you work." James set down his hammer. "You don't have to defy him for my sake." "I'm not." Clara stepped closer. "I'm doing what's right. There's a difference." "Is there Thomas owns this place? Soon he'll own—" He gestured helplessly at her. "No one owns me." Clara said fiercely. "I may be promised to him, but I'm not property. I'm not cattle to be branded and corralled." "I know that." James's voice was soft now. "Believe me, I know exactly what you are." "And what's that?" He looked at her for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with himself. "You're the woman who should have been meant for a better man than either McAllister brother." Before Clara could respond, one of the hired hands appeared, needing James's help with a broken wagon wheel. The moment shattered, leaving Clara standing alone by the forge, her heart racing with possibilities she couldn't afford to consider. That night at dinner, with Martha serving and fussing, Clara watched James across the table. He ate quietly, as always, but she noticed things she'd tried not to see before: the way his hands moved with careful precision, the way lamplight caught the gold in his brown hair, the way he smiled when Martha teased him about his appetite. "You're quiet tonight," Martha observed, clearing the plates. "Storm yesterday take it out of you?" "Just thinking," Clara said. James looked up, caught her eye, then quickly away. "I'll be heading to town tomorrow," he said. "Need supplies for fixing the storm damage. Anything you need." "I'll make a list," Clara said. But what she needed, she couldn't put on any list. What she needed was something that belonged to another, something promised elsewhere, something that looked at her across a dinner table with storm-gray eyes and unspoken longing. Later, as she prepared for bed, Clara caught sight of herself in the small mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who'd arrived 2 weeks ago. This woman had calluses from rope work, sun on her cheeks from riding, and a light in her eyes that had nothing to do with being Thomas McAllister's intended bride. This woman was falling in love with the wrong brother. The storm returned with a vengeance 3 nights later. Worse than before. Clara woke to the sound of thunder that shook the house to its foundations and wind that howled like a living thing. Through her window, she could see the barn doors straining against their latches, and beyond that, the cattle pen where the frightened animals pressed against the fences. She dressed quickly, pulling on the trousers she'd hidden beneath her bed. Thomas was still away. His latest letter had mentioned something about a poker game with the territorial governor's son. Someone had to help secure the ranch. Downstairs, she found Martha already up, stuffing rags under the doors to keep the rain out. "Lord have mercy, I haven't seen a storm like this in 20 years, the older woman said. "James is already out there, trying to move the cattle to higher ground. That fool boy will get himself killed." Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed an oilcloth coat from the hook and plunged into the tempest. The wind nearly knocked her flat. Rain came sideways, stinging like needles, and she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Lightning illuminated the world in stark, terrifying flashes, the creek already swelling its banks. Fence posts leaning dangerously. And there, James struggling with a rope gate while cattle milled in panic. "The creek's going to flood," he shouted when he saw her. "We need to move them now." They worked side by side, fighting wind and rain and frightened animals. Clara's hands were soon raw from the wet rope, her voice hoarse from calling to the cattle. Twice she slipped in the mud, and twice James was there to steady her, his hands strong and sure even in the chaos. It took 2 hours to move the herd to safety. By then, the creek had become a raging torrent, carrying away anything in its path. If they'd been 5 minutes later. They stumbled into the barn, exhausted. The horses whinnied nervously in their stalls, but they were safe, dry, protected. James sank onto a hay bale, breathing hard. Clara collapsed beside him. "You shouldn't have come out," he said, but there was no real reproach in it. "Could have been swept away." "So could you." She was shivering now, the cold finally catching up. "We make a good team." James looked at her then, really looked at her. Her hair was plastered to her head, mud streaked her face, and the oversized coat made her look like a drowned bird. "Clara May Carter," he said softly. "You're something else." He shrugged out of his own coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, over the wet one. The gesture was so tender, so protective, that Clara's heart clenched. "James?" "We should check on the chickens," he said quickly, standing. "Coop might have damage." But the storm chose that moment to intensify. Wind shrieked through the barn walls, and suddenly there was a tremendous crack. Part of the roof peeled back like paper, and rain poured in. "The tack room!" James shouted. "It's more sheltered." They ran for the small room at the back of the barn, slamming the door against the storm's fury. It was dark inside, the only light coming from lightning flashes through a high window. Clara could hear her heart pounding. Or maybe it was James's. They were pressed close in the small space. "Are you all right?" His voice was very near. Yes, she was lying. She was cold and frightened and exhilarated all at once. But more than that, she was achingly aware of James beside her, of the heat of him despite their soaked clothes. They found a lantern and lit it, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The tack room was dry, filled with the comforting smells of leather and oil. James pulled down some horse blankets from a shelf. "Here," he said. "You're shaking." She was, but not entirely from cold. He wrapped a blanket around her, his hands lingering just a moment on her shoulders. They sat on the floor, backs against the wall, listening to the storm rage. The lantern light made a small circle of warmth in the darkness. "Tell me about your family," James said. "You never speak of them." Clara pulled the blanket tighter. "Not much to tell. Pa farms or tries to. Ma died when I was 12, trying to birth my little brother. He died too." She'd never told anyone that. Not so plainly. "After that, it was just Pa and me and too much land for 2 people to work." I'm sorry. Don't be. Everyone has sorrows. She looked at him. Even you. I'd wager. James was quiet for a moment. You know what my sorrow is? Tell me. Watching my brother become someone I don't recognize. He wasn't always cold. When we were boys, he'd take me fishing, teach me to whittle. But after Mama died, after he took over, James shook his head. It's like the land ate his soul. Maybe it wasn't the land, Clara said carefully. Maybe it was the wanting. The wanting. My PA used to say some folks are so busy wanting more, they forget to tend what they have. They're like farmers who keep buying seeds but never water the crops. James smiled slightly. Your PA sounds wise. He has his moments when he's not trading his daughter for 40 acres. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. James shifted closer. Clara, if I could change things. Don't. She turned to face him. Don't say what we're both thinking. It'll only make it harder. Make what harder? This being near you, pretending I don't. She stopped, appalled at herself. Pretending you don't what? His voice was rough. Clara knew she should lie, should laugh it off, should do anything but tell the truth. But the storm had stripped away pretense along with everything else. Pretending I don't think about you, she whispered. All the time. When I'm supposed to be thinking about my future with Thomas. The silence stretched between them, taut as a rope. Then James's hand found hers in the dimness. I've been pretending too, he said. Since the moment you stepped off that wagon, pretending I didn't see a woman who deserved better, pretending I didn't want. What do you want? He turned her hand over, tracing the calluses on her palm. Things I have no right to want. The chance to court you proper, to give you choices instead of obligations. Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. In another life, do you think we could have... Don't? Now it was his turn to stop her. That way lies madness. But his thumb was still stroking her palm, and Clara found herself leaning closer. The storm outside seemed distant now, less real than this moment, this impossible closeness. James! She breathed. He lifted his other hand to her face, fingers ghosting across her cheek. You had mud, he said weakly. Liar. Yes, the word was barely a whisper. I am a liar and a coward and my brother's keeper. But God help me, Clara, The barn door crashed open. They jerked apart as lamplight flooded in. James, Clara. It was Ben, one of the hired hands. Martha sent me looking. Says the house is taking water. Needs all hands. They scrambled to their feet, careful not to look at each other. The spell was broken, but the electricity of that almost moment hung in the air between them. The rest of the night passed in a blur of work moving furniture, mopping water, patching leaks. By dawn, the storm had blown itself out, leaving devastation in its wake. Fences down, the chicken coop partially collapsed, the creek still running high and muddy. Clara was in the kitchen, helping Martha salvage what food they could. When James appeared in the doorway, he was clean now, had changed clothes, but he looked haggard. I need to ride to town, he said, addressing Martha. Check on the bridge. See if we can get supplies through. In this mud, you'll break your fool neck, Martha scolded. Someone has to go. I'll come with you, Clara said quickly. Another pair of hands, in case there's trouble. Martha looked between them, and Clara saw understanding dawn in her weathered face. I suppose that makes sense, the older woman said slowly. Mind your back before dark, and Clara, you'd best change into something proper for town. But when Clara met James by the horses, she was still in trousers. If there's work to be done, skirts won't help, she said, daring him to argue. He didn't. They rode in silence at first, picking their way through the storm debris. The landscape was transformed, familiar landmarks washed away, new gullies carved by water. Clara, James finally said, About last night. Was a mistake, she finished. I know. That's not what I was going to say. She looked at him in surprise. I was going to say it was the most honest I've been in years. He reined in his horse, facing her. I meant every word, but that doesn't change anything. Your promise to Thomas, in a week, maybe 2, you'll be his wife, and I'll find somewhere else to be. Leave. The thought hit her like a physical blow. You can't leave. This ranch is your life. No, he said quietly. No, it's not. Not anymore. He spurred his horse forward before she could respond, and they completed the ride to town in painful silence. The bridge was indeed damaged but passable. They spent the morning helping clear debris, working alongside townspeople who greeted James with genuine warmth and Clara with polite curiosity. That your brothers intended, she heard one man ask James. Pretty little thing. Thomas always did have luck. Yes, James said tightly. He's very lucky. On the ride back, Clara couldn't stand the silence anymore. You can't leave because of me. I can't stay and watch you with him. The words were flat, matter of fact. Every day, seeing you at his table, knowing you're in his bed. He cut himself off. I'm not that strong, Clara. And if I said I'm not that strong either, if I said the thought of being his wife makes me feel like I'm suffocating? James stopped his horse so abruptly Clara nearly collided with him. Don't, he said fiercely. Don't say things like that. You made a promise. Your family made a promise. Breaking it would ruin you. Ruin them. You know that. I know. Tears she'd been fighting all day finally spilled over. I know all of it. But knowing doesn't make it easier. Knowing doesn't stop me from wishing. Clara? He reached out as if to touch her, then pulled back. Please, don't cry. I can bear anything but that. She wiped her eyes angrily. I'm not crying. The wind is making my eyes water. Liar, he said softly, echoing their conversation from the night before. Yes, she met his gaze. But I'll get better at it. I'll have to, won't I, living in that house, pretending to be happy, pretending I don't? Love him, James finished. You'll learn to love him. Thomas has his qualities. He's ambitious, successful. Stop! Clara's voice was sharp. Don't you dare list his virtues to me. Not you. They stared at each other across the space between their horses. The sun was setting, painting the storm-washed world in shades of gold and red. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song. We should get back, James said finally. Martha will worry. But neither moved. They sat their horses in the fading light, memorizing each other's faces, storing up moments against the empty years ahead. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. In the barn last night, if Ben hadn't come in, I would have kissed you, James said simply, and ruined us both. Or saved us. There's no saving us, Clara. There's only duty in doing what's right, even when it feels like dying. They rode home as darkness fell, the space between them filled with everything they couldn't say. At the ranch, lights glowed warm in the windows. Martha would have dinner waiting. Life would go on. As James helped her dismount, his hands lingered at her waist. Clara, he said, and her name sounded like a prayer, like a goodbye. I know, she said, I know. They stood there in the gathering dark, hands almost touching, hearts already breaking. Then Clara turned and walked into the house, leaving James standing alone with the horses and his impossible dreams. Inside, she found a letter waiting. Thomas would return in 3 days. The wedding would take place the following Sunday. Clara held the letter with trembling hands, thinking of storm-gray eyes and gentle hands, of a voice saying her name like it meant everything. She was meant for his brother, she whispered to the empty room. But one night changed her heart forever. The words hung in the air like a confession, like a curse. like the truest thing she'd ever said. Thomas McAllister returned on a Thursday afternoon, riding his black stallion like a conquering general. Clara watched from the kitchen window as he dismounted, brushing trail dust from his expensive coat. He looked exactly as he had when he'd left, immaculate, controlled, untouched by the storms that had nearly destroyed the ranch. "Well," Martha said beside her, "the master's home." There was something in her tone that made Clara glance at her. Martha's face was carefully neutral, but her hands twisted her apron. "Martha, nothing, child, just remembering how different it was when their mother was alive. She had a way of softening the edges." Thomas entered through the front door, hanging his hat with precise movements. "Clara," he said, as if they'd last spoken hours ago instead of weeks, "I trust everything has been in order." "There was a storm," Clara began. "The creek flooded, and we lost some fencing." "Yes, I saw. James should have reinforced those posts last month." He moved to his study. "Have him report to me after supper, and Clara wear something appropriate tonight. I've invited Judge Morrison and his wife for dinner tomorrow. They should meet my bride-to-be." He disappeared into his study, leaving Clara standing in the hallway. She hadn't seen him in 3 weeks, and his first concern was fence posts and dinner parties. At supper, the contrast between the brothers was stark. James sat quietly, still bearing the marks of hard labor, a bandaged hand from repairing the coop. Shadows under his eyes from nights spent watching the weakened dam. Thomas spoke of his travels, the deals he'd made, the important men he'd impressed. "The governor's particularly interested in our water rights," Thomas said, cutting his meat with surgical precision. "I told him we'd be willing to negotiate, for the right price." James's fork paused. "Those water rights feed 3 smaller ranches downstream, which is why they're valuable." Thomas took a sip of wine. "Really, James, you must learn to think beyond next week's needs. I'm thinking of next year's drought, and the families who'll go under without that water." "Then they should have planned better." Thomas's voice was mild, but Clara heard the steel beneath. "This is business." The brothers stared at each other across the table. Clara felt the tension coiling between them, years of unspoken resentments threatening to surface. "How was the storm damage?" Thomas asked finally, changing the subject. James gave a brief report, downplaying the danger, not mentioning Clara's help. Thomas nodded, making mental calculations. "We'll need to hire extra hands for repairs. Take it from the wedding budget, we don't need anything elaborate anyway." Clara's cheeks burned, her wedding reduced to a line item, less important than fence posts. After dinner, Thomas retired to his study with his ledgers. Clara found herself on the porch, needing air. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. She heard boots on the boards and didn't need to turn to know it was James. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I'm to be married in 3 days." "I know." He hasn't asked me a single question about myself. Not one. Does he even know my middle name? My mother's name, anything beyond my function as his future wife. James was silent. What could he say? They both knew the answer. "I heard what you did," James said finally. "During the storm, Ben told me you helped save the Henderson boy when their wagon overturned in the flooding." Clara had almost forgotten. The Hendersons had been trying to reach town when the creek swept their wagon. She'd grabbed a rope and waded in while Ben held the other end, pulling 8-year-old Tommy to safety. "Anyone would have done the same," she said. "No!" James's voice was fierce. "No, they wouldn't! You could have been killed!" "But I wasn't." "But you could have been." He gripped the porch rail. "When Ben told me, Clara, you have to be more careful." "Why?" She turned to face him. "What difference does it make to you if I live or die?" The question hung between them. James looked at her, and in the starlight, she saw everything he couldn't say written on his face. "James, there you are?" Thomas appeared in the doorway. "We need to discuss the Morrison dinner. Clara, you should rest. You look tired." It was a dismissal, clean and effortless. Clara went inside, but paused at the foot of the stairs, listening. "Stay away from her," Thomas said, his voice low but clear. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't insult my intelligence. I see how you look at her, how she looks at you. You're imagining things." "Am I?" Thomas's laugh was cold. "Let me be clear. Brother, Clara is mine, bought and paid for. Whatever romantic notions you've developed, bury them. After the wedding, I'm sending you to manage the northern property. It's time you had your own responsibilities." "The northern property is barely livable. It's exile, and you know it. It's opportunity. Unless you prefer I tell everyone why you really need distance from my wife." Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Thomas knew. Of course he knew. And he would use it to destroy James, to banish him. She fled to her room, not wanting to hear more, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay staring at the ceiling, thinking of James alone on that desolate northern property, punished for the crime of kindness. The next morning brought a flurry of preparation for the Morrison dinner. Clara was fitted for her best dress, her hair arranged elaborately by Martha. She felt like a doll being prepared for display. "You're pale as milk," Martha fussed. "Pinch your cheeks. Give them some color." "Leave her be," Thomas said from the doorway. He surveyed Clara critically. "You'll do. Remember, Judge Morrison's wife is particular about propriety. Speak when spoken to. Agree with whatever she says. Don't mention your background." "My background?" "Your family's situation. It's unseemly." He straightened his cravat. "And Clara, whatever exists between you and my brother ends tonight. I won't have my wife making me a fool." He left before she could respond, not that she had words for the shame and anger burning in her chest. The Morrisons arrived at 6 sharp. Judge Morrison was a thick-set man with calculating eyes. His wife, Constance, was thin as a rail and twice as rigid. She surveyed Clara like a horse at auction. "So you're the bride," Constance said. "Thomas says your people are farmers." "Yes, ma'am." "How quaint." The word dripped condescension. "Well, I suppose Thomas knows what he's doing. A man in his position needs a wife who won't have aspirations." Throughout dinner, Clara endured Constance's barbs disguised as conversation. Was she educated? How unfortunate. Could she play piano? What a shame. Did she have opinions on women's suffrage? Best not to trouble herself with such matters. Thomas seemed oblivious to the insults. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. He and the judge discussed business land deals, water rights, the coming railroad. James was notably absent, claimed by a convenient fence repair that couldn't wait. "Your brother doesn't join us?" Judge Morrison asked. "James prefers the outdoors," Thomas said smoothly. "He's not one for polite company." "Just as well." Constance sniffed. "I always say a family needs only one son in society. The other can tend the farm." Clara's hands clenched in her lap. How dare they dismiss James so easily? He was worth 10 of them, with their fancy clothes and casual cruelties. After dinner, the men retired for cigars. Constance cornered Clara in the parlor. "A word of advice, my dear," she said, though her tone suggested it was more command than suggestion. "I've heard whispers about you and the younger brother. Servants do gossip, so, for your own sake, guard your reputation. Thomas is offering you respectability despite your circumstances. Don't throw it away for some romantic foolishness." "I don't know what you mean," Clara said stiffly. "Of course not." Constance smiled, sharp as a blade. "Just remember, a woman's reputation is like fine china. Once cracked, it can never be truly mended." When the Morrisons finally left, Clara felt wrung out like wet laundry. Thomas seemed pleased, though that went well. He said, Judge Morrison's support will be valuable. You did adequately, Clara. With time, you'll learn to navigate society properly." "Is that what our marriage will be?" Clara asked suddenly. "Me performing adequately while you make deals in the next room." Thomas looked genuinely surprised. "What else would it be? I've been clear about my expectations. You'll have a comfortable home, security, children eventually. In exchange, you'll manage the household and support my business endeavors. It's a fair arrangement, and affection companionship are the purview of romantic novels." He moved toward his study. "We're adults. Clara, we understand reality. Good night." Clara stood alone in the parlor, Constance Morrison's words echoing in her head. But it wasn't her reputation she was worried about cracking, it was her heart, already breaking along the fault lines James had unknowingly created. Late that night, unable to sleep, she wandered to the kitchen for water. She found James there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a ledger. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked without looking up. The Morrisons were educational. Constance Morrison could make a saint feel inadequate. He closed the ledger. "I'm sorry you had to endure that." "Thomas is sending you away," Clara blurted. "After the wedding, to the northern property." James's jaw tightened. "It's for the best." "Best for who? Not for the ranch. Not for you." "Best for you." He stood, moving to the window. "Distance will help. In time, we'll both forget." "I won't forget." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I'll be here, in this house, living a life that should have been—" She broke off. "Should have been what?" His voice was rough. "Different," she whispered. "Everything should have been different." James crossed to her in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. "Don't do this. We've come too far to fall apart now. The wedding is in 2 days. You'll marry Thomas. I'll go north, and in time—" "You'll meet someone," Clara finished. "Someone you can court properly, someone you can choose. And I'll be happy for you. Is that what you want me to say?" "Yes." "Liar." His hands gentled on her shoulders. "Clara, please, if you care for me at all, let me go. Let me believe you'll be happy. It's the only way I can do this. And if I can't pretend anymore, you have to." His voice broke on the words. "We both have to. There's no other choice." Clara pulled away. "There's always a choice. We're just too cowardly to make it." She fled before he could respond, before she could do something irreversible like throw herself into his arms and beg him to run away with her. In her room, she pressed her face into her pillow and let the tears come. Outside, she heard the kitchen door close, heard James's boots on the porch. He was probably going to the barn, to work himself into exhaustion rather than think about what couldn't be. 2 days until the wedding. 2 days to bury her heart so deep even she couldn't find it. 2 days to become the woman Thomas McAllister had bought dutiful, proper, empty. She thought of her mother, dead trying to birth the son her father wanted. She thought of all the women before her who'd traded their dreams for security, their hearts for respectability. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered to the darkness. "I tried to be strong, but I fell in love with the wrong brother, and now I don't know how to stop." The moon traced its path across the sky, and still Clara lay awake, counting the hours until her heart would belong to one man while her body belonged to another. Outside, a coyote howled, lonely and wild and free, everything she'd never be again. The attack came at dawn, 2 days before the wedding. Clara woke to the thunder of hooves and the crack of gunfire. Through her window, she saw riders, a dozen or more, sweeping toward the ranch like a dark wave. Their faces were masked, but their intent was clear: the cattle, the horses, anything of value they could carry off. "Raiders!" Martha's scream echoed through the house. Clara threw on her wrapper and ran downstairs. Thomas was already at the gun cabinet, his face pale but determined. James burst through the front door. rifle in hand. "They're after the herd," James said. "Ben and Samuel are trying to hold them off, but—" "The safe," Thomas interrupted. "They mustn't get to the safe." James stared at his brother. "Forget the money, we need every hand defending the stock." "The money is what matters," Thomas snapped. "Without it—" Another gunshot, closer now. Through the window, Clara could see the barn beginning to smoke. "Fire!" she gasped. "They've set the barn on fire." "The horses," James said, already moving. "Clara, get to the root cellar. Martha, take her." "No." Clara grabbed a bucket. "I'm not hiding while the ranch burns." There was no time to argue. James ran for the barn while Thomas headed upstairs to defend his safe. Clara realized with disgust. She and Martha rushed to the kitchen pump, filling buckets. The scene outside was chaos. Raiders circled the property, whooping and firing into the air. Some were trying to cut out cattle while others looted the smokehouse. The barn fire was spreading, orange flames licking at the dawn sky. Clara saw James disappear into the burning structure and her heart stopped. The screams of trapped horses pierced the air. Without thinking, she ran toward the barn. "Clara, no!" Martha's voice behind her. But Clara didn't stop. The heat hit her like a wall. Smoke filled her lungs, making her eyes stream. Through the haze, she saw James struggling with a stall door, warped from the heat. "Get out!" he shouted when he saw her. "Not without you." She grabbed a pitchfork, using it to pry at the door. Together they forced it open, and Buttercup burst free, eyes rolling in terror. "The boy?" James said suddenly. "Where's the Henderson boy?" Clara's blood chilled. Young Tommy Henderson had spent the night his parents were traveling, and Martha had offered to watch him. He often slept in the hayloft, loving to be near the horses. "Tommy!" Clara screamed. "Tommy!" A small voice, terrified, "Help, I can't get down!" The ladder to the loft was already burning. James looked up, calculating, then at Clara. "Get the horses out, all of them!" "James, no!" But he was already climbing, using the barn's framework like a ladder. Clara forced herself to focus, throwing open stall doors, dodging frightened animals. The smoke was getting thicker, the heat unbearable. Above, she heard James calling to Tommy, trying to calm the boy. A beam crashed down, showering sparks. Time was running out. Clara got the last horse free and looked up to see James at the loft edge, Tommy in his arms. The boy was crying, clinging to James's neck. "I'll have to drop him," James called. "Catch him." Clara positioned herself below, arms outstretched. "I've got him. Tommy, you'll be fine." James let go. For a heart-stopping moment, the boy was falling. Then Clara caught him, the impact driving her to her knees. Tommy sobbed into her shoulder, but he was alive, unharmed. "Run!" James shouted. "Get him out!" Clara ran. Tommy clutched in her arms. Behind her, she heard another crash, felt the heat intensify. She burst from the barn just as part of the roof collapsed. "James!" She spun around, searching the smoke. "James!" For terrible seconds, there was nothing. Then a figure stumbled from the inferno. James, clothes singed, face blackened with soot, but alive. Clara set Tommy down and ran to James, catching him as he swayed. "You fool!" she said, tears streaming. "You wonderful, reckless fool!" He gripped her arms, coughing. "The boy." "He's safe. You saved him." Around them, the battle continued. Ben and Samuel, joined by neighboring ranchers who'd seen the smoke, were driving the raiders back. Thomas had finally emerged from the house, firing from the porch, protecting his precious safe. But the raiders had what they'd come for. Half the herd was gone, supplies stolen, destruction everywhere. As the sun climbed higher, the attackers melted away into the hills, leaving devastation in their wake. The barn was a total loss. smoking ruins against the morning sky. Several outbuildings damaged, dead cattle scattered across the pasture. It could have been worse, would have been, without the neighbors' help. Clara found herself in the midst of it all, helping tend wounds, calming frightened animals, distributing water to the firefighters. Her nightgown was ruined, her hair wild, her hands blistered from bucket handles. She'd never felt more alive. "Look at her," she heard one neighbor say. "That's a woman who'll stand by her man through anything." "Lucky Thomas," another agreed. But it was James's eyes Clara felt following her. James, who appeared whenever the work got too heavy. James, who quietly took the heaviest tasks from her hands. By noon, some order had been restored. The Hendersons arrived, frantic, to collect Tommy. The boy threw his arms around Clara's neck. "She saved me," he told his mother. "Her and Mr. James, they ran right into the fire." Mrs. Henderson wept, thanking them over and over. As they left, Clara heard Tommy say, "When I grow up, I want to be brave like Mr. James and Miss Clara." "Brave," Thomas said from behind her. His clothes were still clean. Clara noticed. "Or foolish. You could have been killed." "Someone had to act," Clara said. "A child's life was at stake." "And if you died, what of our wedding, my reputation?" Clara stared at him. "Is that really what concerns you, your reputation?" "Without reputation, we have nothing." Thomas surveyed the damage coldly. "This will set us back months. The northern property will have to wait. James is needed here." He walked away, already calculating losses. Clara watched him go, something crystallizing in her chest. She'd seen both brothers tested today, and only one had proved his worth. As if summoned by her thoughts, James appeared, leading a singed but intact buttercup. "Thought you'd want to know she's all right." "James," Clara's voice was thick. "What you did today, anyone would have—" "No." She stepped closer. "No, they wouldn't. Thomas didn't. He protected his safe while you protected lives." Clara." "I can't do it." The words burst from her. "I can't marry him. Not after today. Not after seeing—" "Don't." James's voice was raw. "The wedding is tomorrow. Your family needs this. Nothing's changed." "Everything's changed." Clara gestured at the ruins around them. "I watched you run into fire for a child you barely know. I watched Thomas count money while the ranch burned. How can you ask me to—" "Because I love you." The words hung in the air between them, more shocking than gunfire. James closed his eyes, as if in pain. "I love you enough to want better for you than either McAllister brother can offer. Thomas will give you security. I'd give you nothing but struggle and uncertainty." "And love?" Clara's voice broke. "Would you give me love?" "Love doesn't feed children or keep roofs overhead. My parents loved each other," Clara said fiercely. "We were poor as church mice, but Mama smiled every day until the fever took her. That's worth something. Is it worth your father losing his land, worth your family's future?" Clara had no answer for that. They stood among the ashes, the smell of smoke heavy around them, and she knew he was right. Love was a luxury people like them couldn't afford. That evening, as Clara helped Martha prepare supper, neighbors arrived with offerings food, lumber, even a milk cow to replace one killed in the raid, the community rallying, the way they did in hard times. Sheriff Patterson came too, grim-faced. "Same gang that's been hitting spreads all along the valley," he said. "We'll catch them, but it'll take time." "We'll post guards," James said. "Can't afford another surprise." "Smart thinking." The sheriff looked between the brothers. "Heard you both fought bravely. Town's lucky to have men like you." Thomas preened, but Clara saw James shift uncomfortably. He'd never been one for praise. That night, Clara couldn't eat. Tomorrow she'd put on her mother's wedding dress and promise herself to a man she didn't love, while the one she did love watched from the congregation. You need to eat something, Martha said gently. Big day tomorrow. I'm not hungry. Martha studied her with knowing eyes. Child, can I speak plain? Clara nodded. I've been with this family 15 years. I've seen things, understood things. And I'll tell you what I told James's mother when she was fixing to marry their father. You can't live your life for other folks' expectations. She married him anyway? Yes, and found happiness, in time. But that was her choice. Made free, make sure whatever you do tomorrow is your choice. Not your father's or Thomas's or even James's. Yours. Clara squeezed the older woman's hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She went to bed early but lay awake, listening to the sounds of the ranchmen on guard duty, horses restless in their temporary shelters, the endless whisper of prairie wind. Tomorrow would come whether she wanted it or not. Just before dawn, unable to bear her bed any longer, she dressed and slipped outside. The ruins of the barn were dark against the lightening sky. She found herself drawn there, to the place where everything had changed. Couldn't sleep either. She wasn't surprised to find James there. It seemed fitting, this last meeting in the ashes of disaster. I keep thinking about Tommy, she said. How scared he must have been. He was brave, stayed calm, trusted us to get him out. The way I trust you, Clara said softly. James was quiet for a long moment. After tomorrow, that trust has to transfer to Thomas. He's not a bad man. Clara, just different. I know. She wrapped her arms around herself. I'll try to be a good wife to him. You'll be wonderful. His voice was thick. Any man would be lucky. Stop! Clara turned to face him. Please, don't make this harder. I'm trying to make it easier, for both of us. By acting like this is what either of us wants. By accepting what has to be. James looked at her then, and in the growing light she could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of impossible choices. In a few hours, you'll be my sister. I need to start thinking of you that way. Can you? I'll have to. They stood there as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere a rooster crowed, announcing the new day, Clara's wedding day. I should go, she said. Martha will be looking for me. Clara, James caught her hand as she turned. Be happy, whatever it takes. Find a way to be happy. Promise me. She looked at their joined hands, memorizing the feeling. I promise to try. It was the best she could offer, and they both knew it. James released her hand, and Clara walked back to the house, each step taking her closer to a future she'd never chosen. Behind her, James stood among the ashes, watching her go. In a few hours, she'd belong to his brother, and he'd have to find a way to live with that, even if it killed him. The ranch woke around them, men calling to each other, hammers already ringing as neighbors began to rebuild. Life went on, regardless of breaking hearts. It always had. It always would. The wedding was set for noon, but by 11:30, whispers were already rippling through the congregation like wind through wheat. Clara stood in the small room behind the church, Martha fussing with her veil, but she could hear the voices through the thin walls. Did you see them during the fire? The way they worked together? Poor Thomas, blind as a bat. Hush now, that's gossip. It's not gossip if everyone can see it plain as day. Clara's hands trembled as she smoothed her mother's wedding dress. The ivory silk had yellowed with age, but it was still beautiful. Still carried the faint scent of the lavender her mother had loved. You're pale as parchment, Martha said, pinching Clara's cheeks. There now, that's better. Through the window, Clara could see townspeople arriving, the Hendersons, with little Tommy scrubbed clean, Sheriff Patterson and his wife, the neighbors who'd helped fight the fire, and there, standing apart from the others, James in his Sunday best, looking like a man attending a funeral. It's time, Martha said gently. Clara's father waited outside the door, uncomfortable in his borrowed suit. He'd arrived that morning, full of talk about the land transfer. The papers Thomas had already signed. His daughter's happiness hadn't entered the conversation. "You look like your mother," he said now, offering his arm. "Do I?" Clara took his arm, legs unsteady. Was she happy? Pa on her wedding day. He looked uncomfortable. Happy enough. She knew her duty. Duty, there was that word again. Heavy as iron shackles. The church doors opened, and Clara saw her future stretched before her like a road through desert, long, straight, and utterly without comfort. Thomas stood at the altar, immaculate despite yesterday's chaos, the preacher beside him, Bible in hand. And there, in the front row where the family sat, James staring steadfastly at his hands. The walk down the aisle lasted forever and no time at all. Clara was aware of faces turning toward her, of whispers behind raised hands. She kept her eyes fixed ahead, afraid that if she looked at anyone, especially James, she'd turn and run. Dearly beloved. The preacher began, his voice echoing in the small church. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Thomas McAllister and Clara May Carter." The words washed over her, meaningless as creek babble. She was aware of Thomas beside her, of the weight of her mother's ring on her finger, of James sitting still as stone just feet away. If anyone here present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The silence stretched taut. Clara found herself holding her breath, waiting for James to stand up and declare his love, for the roof to collapse, for God himself to intervene. Nothing happened. The preacher continued. But then the church doors banged open. "Stop!" The voice was young, frightened. Tommy Henderson broke free from his mother's grasp and ran down the aisle. You can't make her." "Tommy, Mrs." Henderson hurried after him, mortified. "I'm so sorry, please." "No." The boy planted himself between Clara and Thomas. "She loves Mr. James. I saw them. In the fire. The way they looked at each other. The way they—" "That's enough." Thomas's voice was ice. He grabbed the boy's shoulder. "Remove this child." "Don't touch him." Clara heard herself speak, her voice strange in her own ears. She knelt before Tommy, taking his small hands in hers. "It's all right, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have to do things that don't make sense." "But you saved me," Tommy said, tears streaming. "You and Mr. James, you belong together." "Tommy, he's right." The words fell into the church like stones into still water. Clara looked up to see James on his feet, face pale but determined. "James," Thomas warned. "Sit down." "No." James moved into the aisle. "I've sat down and shut up my whole life. Not today." He looked at Clara, and his eyes held everything love, pain, desperate hope. "The boy's right. God help me. I love her." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Thomas's face darkened to purple. "Have you lost your mind?" he hissed. "She's my bride." "She's a person," James shot back. "Not property, not a business transaction. A woman with her own heart and mind and choices." "Choices," Thomas laughed bitterly. "What choices does she have? Her family is destitute. I'm offering security, respectability. You're offering a cold bed and a colder heart." James stepped closer. "I saw you yesterday. Thomas, the ranch burning and you counting money. You don't want a wife. You want a broodmare with good accounting skills." Thomas lunged at him. The brothers collided, years of resentment exploding in the middle of the church aisle. Women screamed. Men rushed to separate them. "Stop!" Clara shouted. "Both of you, stop!" They froze, turning to her. Thomas's collar was torn, James's lip bleeding. Brothers who'd become strangers, now enemies over her. Clara stood slowly, aware of every eye upon her. Her father had shrunk back, horrified. The preacher clutched his Bible like a shield. The entire town held its breath. "You want to know what I choose?" She looked at Thomas. "I choose honesty. The truth is, I would make you a terrible wife. I'd resent every day, every night, every moment of a marriage built on obligation instead of affection." She turned to James. "And you beautiful, impossible fool. You think love is enough? You think we can build a life on feelings alone? Damn the consequences." "Yes," James said simply. "I do." Clara felt tears spill over. "So do I." She reached up and pulled off her veil, letting it fall to the floor. "I'm sorry, Pa. I know what this costs you. But I won't sell myself for 40 acres of land." "You're ruining yourself," Thomas said coldly. "No decent man will have you after this scandal." "Then I'll be indecent." Clara lifted her chin. "I'd rather be ruined and honest than respectable and living a lie." The church erupted. Some shouted condemnation, others support. Clara's father sank into a pew, head in his hands. Martha was crying, though, whether from sorrow or joy. Clara couldn't tell. Through it all, James's eyes never left hers. He held out his hand, a question and a promise all at once. Clara took it. They walked out together, fingers intertwined, leaving behind the wreckage of expectations and the birth of a scandal that would feed town gossip for years. Outside, the sun shone bright and merciless. Clara blinked in the light, suddenly aware of what she'd done. No wedding, no security, no future but the uncertain one she'd chosen with James. "What now?" she asked. "I don't know," James admitted. "I have nothing to offer you. No home, no prospects. Thomas will see to that. Just myself and whatever work these hands can find." "That's enough." "Is it?" Clara squeezed his hand. "It's everything." Behind them, the church doors burst open. Thomas emerged, straightening his torn collar with precise movements. "You've made your choice," he said, voice deadly calm. "Now live with it. You're no longer welcome on McAllister land, either of you." He looked at James. "You're dead to me, brother. Take your whore and go." James started forward, fists clenched, but Clara held him back. "He's not worth it," she said. "Let him have his anger. We have each other." Thomas's composure cracked slightly. "You think this is some romantic story you'll be begging in the streets within a month. And when you are, don't come crawling back." "We won't," James said. "I'd rather starve with her than feast at your table." Sheriff Patterson approached, looking uncomfortable. "Perhaps everyone should calm down." "The law's clear," Thomas cut in. "They're trespassing if they set foot on my property. See that it's enforced?" He stalked away, and the crowd began to disperse. Some looked at Clara with pity, others with disgust, a few misses. Henderson among them offered small smiles of support. Clara's father approached, aged 10 years and 10 minutes. "What have you done, girl?" "What I had to, Pa. That land our only chance." "I know." Clara felt the weight of his disappointment. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't live that lie. Not for 40 acres, not for 400. He turned away without another word. Shuffling toward his wagon, Clara watched him go, her heart breaking a little more. "The Hendersons," James said suddenly. "They mentioned needing help with their harvest. It's not much, but it's honest work. And there's an old cabin on their property needs fixing, but it's shelter." "You already talked to them." "This morning." He looked sheepish. "I hoped. Against all reason, I hoped." Martha bustled up, carrying a cloth bundle. "Your things," she said to Clara, "and some food for the road." She pressed the bundle into Clara's hands, then pulled her into a fierce embrace. "You be happy, child. You hear me? You be happy." "I'll try," Clara whispered. "Trying's not enough." Martha pulled back, fixing them both with stern eyes. You've burned every bridge, scandalized the county, thrown away security for love. You'd better make it worth it." She hurried away before they could respond, wiping her eyes with her apron as the churchyard emptied. Clara and James stood alone, hands still clasped. Her wedding dress, her mother's dress, was dusty at the hem, and she had nowhere to go but a broken-down cabin with a man who had nothing to offer but his heart. "Are you sure?" James asked one more time. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Then let's go home." "Where's home?" "Wherever you are," he said simply. "Today, tomorrow, always wherever you are is home." They walked away from the church, from the life that had been planned for them, from everything safe and certain. Behind them, tongues wagged and judgments flew. Ahead lay struggle and hardship and the kind of bone-deep happiness that comes from choosing love over logic. "James," Clara said as they reached the road. "Yes, I love you too. I should have said it in there, in front of everyone. I love you, and I choose you, and I'd do it again 1,000 times over." He stopped walking, turned to face her, and right there on the dusty road where anyone could see, he kissed her. Not the chaste kiss of a brother-in-law, not the dutiful kiss of an arranged marriage, but the kiss of a man who'd waited a lifetime for this moment. When they broke apart, Clara was breathless and laughing. What will people say? Let them say what they will. James grinned, looking younger than she'd ever seen him. "We're already ruined, remember?" "Thoroughly," Clara agreed. "Completely, gloriously ruined." They walked on, toward their uncertain future, hands clasped and hearts light despite everything they'd lost. Because sometimes ruin was just another word for freedom. And sometimes the biggest scandal was simply two people choosing love in a world that dealt in transactions. Behind them, the church bell tolled the hour noon, when Clara should have been becoming Mrs. Thomas McAllister instead. She was just Clara, walking beside just James, scandalous and penniless and absolutely, perfectly, exactly where she belonged. The desert sun blazed merciless overhead as Thomas McAllister rode toward the abandoned mine shaft, his jaw set with cold determination. 3 months had passed since the wedding scandal. 3 months of watching his carefully built reputation crumble while his brother played house with his former bride in the Hendersons' old cabin. "This is the place," said Jake Garrett, the hired gun riding beside him, a mean-looking man with dead eyes and scarred hands. "Old Dolores Mine. Been abandoned since the vein ran dry in '72. Thomas dismounted, studying the desolate landscape. Perfect. Remote enough that no one would hear gunshots, with a dozen mine shafts where a body could disappear forever. "You sure he'll come?" Garrett asked, checking his revolver. "He'll come." Thomas pulled out the forged letter supposedly from Clara, begging James to meet her here urgently. My brother always was a fool for a woman in distress. What Thomas hadn't counted on was Clara intercepting the messenger. She'd been in town buying supplies when young Billy Patterson, the sheriff's nephew, approached her with the letter. "Man paid me to deliver this to James McAllister," the boy said. "Said it was from you, but that didn't seem right, you being right here and all." Clara's blood chilled as she read the obvious forgery. James was already riding out to check their trap lines. He'd pass right by the old mine road. "Billy," she said urgently, "run to your uncle. Tell him Thomas McAllister's planning something at the Dolores mine. Go." She didn't wait to see if the boy obeyed. Mounting Buttercup James had managed to buy the mare from Thomas's creditors. When the ranch finances tangled, she rode hard for the mine, praying she wasn't too late. James had indeed taken the mine road, curious when he saw fresh horse tracks leading toward the abandoned shafts. His instincts prickled warning, but he followed anyway. If someone was using the old mines for shelter or worse, for hiding stolen goods, the sheriff needed to know. He was dismounting to investigate when Thomas stepped out from behind a rock formation. "Hello, brother." James's hand moved toward his gun, then stilled. Despite everything, this was still his brother. "Thomas, what are you doing out here?" "Cleaning up loose ends." Thomas's smile was cold as winter wind. "You've cost me everything. You know, my bride, my reputation, even the ranch creditors calling in loans, neighbors refusing to do business, all because you couldn't keep your hands off what was mine." "Clara was never yours," James said quietly. "That was the problem. You can't own people like cattle." "Spare me the philosophy." Thomas nodded to someone behind James. "Drop your gun, slowly." James turned to see Garrett emerging from cover, rifle trained on him, with careful movements. James unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall. "Hired killers. Thomas, is that what you've become?" "I've become what you made me." Thomas pulled his own revolver. "Here's how this goes. You disappeared. Ran off. Couldn't face the shame. Maybe headed to California. Maybe Mexico. Either way, gone. And if Clara asks too many questions, well, accidents happen." "You wouldn't hurt her?" "Wouldn't I?" Thomas's eyes were empty as glass. "She ruined me. You both did. Why should either of you get happiness when I've lost everything?" "Because you never had anything real to begin with." James said, "Just numbers and ledgers and people you thought you could control. That's not a life. Thomas, that's just existing." "Enough talk," Garrett interrupted. "Let's finish this." But as he raised his rifle, a shot rang out. Garrett spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. Clara emerged from behind a boulder, James's spare rifle smoking in her hands. "The next one goes in your head," she said steadily, though James could see her hands shaking. Thomas swung his gun toward her. "You always were more trouble than you're worth." "No!" James lunged at his brother. They grappled for the weapon, rolling in the dust. Thomas was taller, but James was stronger from years of real work. The gun went flying. Garrett, wounded but not dead, crawled for his fallen rifle. Clara fired again, the bullet kicking up dust inches from his hand. "Don't!" she warned. The brothers rolled dangerously close to the mineshaft's edge. Thomas grabbed a rock, swinging it at James's head. James ducked, and momentum carried Thomas forward. For a moment he teetered on the edge, arms windmilling. James grabbed for him instinctively. "Thomas." Their eyes met a lifetime of brotherhood compressed into a single second. Then Thomas's lips twisted into that cold smile. "You always were too soft," he said, and let himself fall backward into the darkness. "No!" James's cry echoed off the canyon walls. He stared into the shaft, but there was only blackness and the distant sound of settling rocks. Clara was beside him in an instant, pulling him back from the edge. "James, don't! It's too deep! He's gone!" Sheriff Patterson arrived with a posse 20 minutes later, Billy having done his job well. They found James sitting in the dust, Clara's arms around him, staring at the mine shaft that had become his brother's grave. "What happened here?" the sheriff asked, though the scene told its own story. Clara explained while James sat silent. Garrett, wounded and facing the noose for attempted murder, confirmed her account, eager to shift blame to his dead employer. "Sounds like self-defense to me," Patterson said finally. "Thomas McAllister made his choices. You two did what you had to." He looked at James with something like compassion. "I'm sorry about your brother. Whatever else he was still blood." They took Garrett away in irons. The posse offered to attempt recovering Thomas's body, but the shaft was too deep, too unstable. In the end, they piled rocks over the opening, a rough monument to ambition gone wrong. As the sun set, James and Clara rode home slowly, side by side. Neither spoke until they reached their cabin. Small but clean, with morning glories Clara had planted climbing up the walls. "I tried to save him," James said finally. "At the end, I tried." "I know." Clara took his hand. "That's who you are. Even after everything, you tried. He was my brother. I remember when he taught me to read. Using those old newspapers, he'd sound out each word, patient as could be. James's voice broke. What happened to that boy? Life happened. Choices happened. Clara dismounted and drew him into her arms. You can't save someone who doesn't want saving. James, you can only choose your own path. That night, they sat on their small porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The scandal would follow them, the woman who jilted one brother for another, the man who stole his brother's bride, and now the mysterious disappearance of Thomas McAllister. But here, in their simple home, none of that mattered. The Hendersons want me to manage their whole operation, James said suddenly. With the harvest money, we could buy a few acres of our own. Start small, build something real. Is that what you want? I want a life with you. Everything else is just details. Clara leaned into him. Then let's build it together. A coyote howled in the distance, wild and free. Once, that sound had made Clara feel trapped, longing for something she couldn't name. Now it just sounded like home. Over the following weeks, the truth emerged in pieces. Thomas's dealings had grown increasingly desperate loans from dangerous men, forged documents, even cattle rustling from neighbors he'd blamed on raiders. His empire, built on greed and intimidation, had been crumbling long before Clara chose James. He was so afraid of being poor again, Martha told them when she visited, bringing preserves and news from town. After your parents died, he'd wake up screaming about losing everything. I think that fear ate him alive, bit by bit. Some in town blamed Clara and James for Thomas's death. Others, those who'd suffered under his business practices, quietly expressed relief. The ranch was sold to pay debts, the McAllister name fading from prominence. But in the Hendersons' old cabin, love grew like the morning glories on the walls. James worked the fields with quiet satisfaction, building something honest with his own hands. Clara kept the books, tended her garden, and felt her heart heal with each passing day. One evening, as summer gave way to autumn, Clara found James standing by the creek that bordered their small plot. He held a leather journal she recognized Thomas's, recovered from his saddlebags. Listen to this, James said, reading. James thinks I don't see how he looks at her. The fool doesn't understand in this world. You take what you want or someone takes it from you. Love is just another weakness to exploit. He closed the journal, staring at the water. He saw it all, knew how we felt, and it only made him more determined to possess you. He possessed nothing in the end, Clara said softly. Just dust and darkness and a lonely fall. James hurled the journal into the creek, watching the current carry it away. No more looking back. He made his choices. We've made ours. That night, Clara told James about the child growing within her new life to balance what had been lost. He wept then, finally, for the brother who'd chosen pride over love, for the family that might have been, for the joy that was still possible despite everything. Thomas was wrong, he said, hand gentle on her still flat stomach. Love isn't weakness. It's the only strength worth having. As autumn deepened toward winter, the story of the McAllister brothers became legend in the valley, a cautionary tale about greed and pride, and the price of trying to own what was meant to be free. Some versions painted Clara as a temptress who destroyed a family. Others saw her as a woman brave enough to choose love over security. But in their small cabin, as snow began to fall and James added another log to the fire, the truth was simpler to people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd paid the price for that finding, and who'd discovered that sometimes the greatest scandal was simply choosing happiness in a world that preferred misery. No regrets? James asked one night, Clara drowsing in his arms. None, she murmured. How could I regret the path that led me to you? Outside, winter wind howled through the valley, but inside was warmth and light and the quiet breathing of two hearts finally at peace. The morning would bring work and struggle and the ongoing challenge of building a life from nothing but love and determination. But for now, there was the crackle of fire, the whisper of snow against windows, and the solid presence of the man who'd been worth every scandal, every loss, every hard-won joy. In the distance, a wolf called to its mate across the frozen land, and in the cabin that had become a home, Clara smiled and pulled James closer, grateful for the storms that had brought them safe to harbor at last. Spring arrived like a blessing after the hardest winter anyone could remember. Clara stood on the porch of their cabin, now expanded with a new room, watching James work the field with their hired hand. Samuel, one of the few from the old McAllister ranch who'd sought them out, loyal to James rather than the McAllister name. Her hand rested on her rounded belly where their child grew strong. The morning sickness had passed, replaced by an energy that had her up before dawn, preparing for the day ahead. Today was special. They were finally signing the deed to their own land. 20 acres purchased with sweat and determination. "You'll wear a groove in that floor if you keep pacing," Martha said from inside. The older woman had come to help with preparations for the celebration. Half the valley was invited, those who'd stood by them through scandal and struggle. "I can't help it," Clara laughed. "After everything, to finally have something that's truly ours, say—" "You've had something that's yours all along," Martha said, nodding toward James. "That man would give you the moon if he could reach it," as if hearing his name in their thoughts. James looked up from his work and waved, even from a distance. Clara could see his smile, the easy, genuine joy that had replaced the quiet resignation of his years under Thomas's shadow. The sound of approaching wagons drew their attention. The Hendersons arrived first. Mrs. Henderson clutching a basket of her famous preserves. Young Tommy jumped down and ran to Clara. "Miss Clara Pa says you're getting your own land today." "We are," Clara said, ruffling his hair. "And you know what? You're welcome here any time. I'll never forget what you did at the church." The boy blushed. "I just told the truth." Sometimes that's the bravest thing a person can do. More neighbors arrived: the Pattersons, the Millers, even crusty old Walter Bennett, who'd initially condemned their scandal but had come around after James helped save his cattle during a blizzard. "Never thought I'd see the day," Walter admitted, pumping James's hand. "You've done good. Boy, your mother would be proud." Sheriff Patterson brought the documents, making it official. As Clara and James signed their names to the deed, she thought about how far they'd come from that dusty day when she'd arrived as Thomas's mail-order bride. "To the McAllisters," someone shouted, raising a glass of Martha's apple cider. "To the future," James countered, his arm around Clara's waist. The celebration continued into the evening, but Clara noticed James growing quiet as the sun set. She found him by the creek, staring at the water that sparkled gold in the dying light. "What is it?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "I was thinking about Thomas," he admitted. "He should be here. Despite everything, he was my brother. He should see what we've built." "He made his choices, James." "I know, but I wonder sometimes if our parents had lived, if he hadn't carried so much so young. Could things have been different?" Clara turned him to face her. "You carried just as much, and you chose love over bitterness. That's not about circumstances, James. That's about the heart." He pulled her close, mindful of her growing belly. "How did I get so lucky?" "It wasn't luck," she said. "It was choice. We chose each other, despite everything." As they walked back to their guests, Clara felt a flutter in her womb, the baby's first movement. She gasped, grabbing James's hand and pressing it to her stomach. "Did you feel that?" His eyes widened in wonder. "Was that—" "Our child," Clara whispered. "Saying hello." James dropped to his knees right there in the grass, pressing his ear to her belly. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your papa, and I promise you'll never doubt you're loved, not for a single day." Clara ran her fingers through his hair, tears blurring her vision. This moment of pure joy was worth every struggle, every judgment, every loss. "Come on," she said, helping him up. "Our guests are waiting." The party lasted until the stars came out. Neighbors, sharing stories and laughter. The kind of community Clara had never known, growing up poor and isolated. As the last wagon rolled away, she and James sat on their porch, tired but content. "I've been thinking about names," Clara said. "If it's a boy." "Not Thomas," James said quickly. "I loved my brother, but that name carries too much weight." "I was thinking Matthew." Clara said, "After your father, Martha says he was a good man, before grief took him." James was quiet for a long moment. He used to carry me on his shoulders through these very fields, telling me stories about each plant, each animal. Said the land would teach you everything if you just paid attention. "Then Matthew it is, and if it's a girl—" "Rose," James said without hesitation. "Like the wild roses your mother loved." "How do you know about that?" He smiled. "You talk in your sleep sometimes. About her garden, the roses she tended even when there wasn't enough water for anything else." Clara leaned into him. "Rose or Matthew McAllister, the first of many, God willing." "Many," James laughed. "Let's start with one and see how we manage." But Clara could see it, children running through these fields, learning to ride on Buttercup's eventual foals, growing up free and loved and knowing they belonged. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Clara was hanging laundry when a fine carriage rolled up, out of place on their simple farm. A well-dressed woman stepped out, followed by a man in an expensive suit. "Mrs. McAllister?" the woman asked. "Yes," Clara approached warily. "I'm Mrs. Catherine Hartwell, Thomas's associate from Denver." Clara's blood chilled. "If you're here about debts—" "No, nothing like that." The woman's expression softened. "I'm here because Thomas left something in my care. Something he said belonged to his brother." She produced a leather portfolio. Inside were documents, the original deed to the McAllister ranch, stock certificates, bank drafts. "I don't understand," James said, joining them. "Mrs. Hartwell sighed. "Thomas and I were close. He came to Denver often, and we developed an understanding. The night before he died, he gave me these, said if anything happened to him, I should wait 6 months, then bring them to you." "But the ranch was sold for debts." James protested. "Only part of it. The man, a lawyer, it turned out, explained. Thomas had separated certain assets, put them in trust. The main house and immediate grounds were sold. Yes, but the northern property, the water rights, several parcels, they're yours." Clara's head spun. "Why would he do this?" Mrs. Hartwell smiled sadly. "He said his brother was the only one who ever really loved him. Even when he didn't deserve it, said you'd know what to do with it all, something about building instead of breaking." James sank onto the porch steps, papers clutched in his hands. Clara saw his shoulders shake and realized he was crying for the brother who'd found a shred of redemption in his final days. For the love that had survived despite everything. "Thank you," Clara told Mrs. Hartwell, "for bringing these, for caring about him." "He wasn't an easy man to love," the woman admitted. "But in his own way, I think he tried." She returned to her carriage, pausing at the door. "He talked about you both. You know, said you had what he never could find the ability to be happy with enough instead of always wanting more." After they left, Clara and James sat surrounded by papers worth more than they'd ever dreamed. The irony wasn't lost on them, Thomas's final gift making them wealthy after they'd found happiness in poverty. "What do we do with it all?" Clara asked. James was quiet for a long time, then smiled. "We build something. Not for us, we have enough. But think of it, Clara. That northern property could house 12 families. The water rights could be shared fairly, not hoarded. We could create the community Thomas never understood. A legacy, Clara murmured, not of greed, but of grace. He'd hate it, James said, but he was smiling through his tears. No, Clara said softly. I think the boy who taught you to read would understand perfectly. As spring deepened towards summer, they began the work parceling out land to young families, sharing water rights with struggling ranchers, building something larger than themselves. The scandal of their beginning faded, replaced by respect for what they were creating. The baby came with the first harvest, Matthew James McAllister, born squalling and strong as the sun rose over their fields. Clara, exhausted but triumphant, watched James hold his son with hands that shook. He's perfect, James whispered. Look at him. Clara, we made this. We made him. Together, she agreed, reaching up to touch both her boys, like everything else together. Outside, neighbors gathered with food and congratulations. Martha bustled about making everyone comfortable. Sheriff Patterson brought a silver spoon for the baby. The Hendersons arrived with Tommy, who peered at the infant with awe. He's so small, Tommy said. Was I ever that small? Smaller, his mother laughed. And louder. As the day wore on, Clara found herself on the porch again, their favorite spot for watching the world. James joined her, baby Matthew sleeping in his arms. Do you ever think about that day? Clara asked. When I stepped off that wagon, supposed to marry Thomas. Every day, James admitted. I think about how different everything could have been, all the small choices that led us here. The bride was meant for his brother, Clara said softly, echoing the words that had haunted them. But one night changed her heart forever. Not just one night, James corrected. Every night, every morning, every moment I get to wake up beside you, watch you with our son. Build this life together, my heart changes and chooses you all over again. Clara kissed him softly, tasting tears and joy and the promise of all the years to come. In the distance, she could see the fields James had planted, green with new growth, the cabin with its morning glories, the neighbors who'd become family, the child who'd carry their love into the future. No regrets, James asked. Their old question. Only one. Clara said. He looked at her in alarm. I wish I'd gotten off that wagon and kissed you right there in front of everyone. She laughed. Would have saved us all a lot of trouble. Scandalous woman, James said, but he was laughing too. What am I going to do with you? Love me, Clara said simply. Just love me. Always, he promised. In this life and whatever comes after, always. As the sun set over their land, really theirs now. In every way that mattered, Clara knew that sometimes the greatest stories weren't about perfection. They were about people brave enough to choose love over fear, forgiveness over bitterness, and hope over resignation. The bride had indeed been meant for his brother, but fate and courage, and one storm-torn night had written a different ending, one filled with crying babies and blooming gardens, and the kind of happiness that comes from building something true with your own hands and heart. And in the end, that was the only story worth telling. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Clara and James's journey. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover this tale of love conquering all odds. Your support means everything.